Hi everyone, welcome to Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast. This podcast is all about farmers markets, how to increase your market business success, and in our current climate, maximize safety while providing people with fresh food. Farmers markets are essential. Whether you're a farmers market manager or a small farmer or food maker selling at farmers markets, you have found just the right podcast. On today's episode of Tent Talk, we're talking with Rawley about helping farmers to expand their product lines and increase sales at markets. I'm one of your hosts, Bridget Myers. I've spent years as an on-site farmers market manager, and I'm the education coordinator at Farmers Market Pros.
And I'm Kat Fields-White, Director of San Diego Markets, still an active Farmers Market Manager, founder of Farmers Market Pros, and host of the Farmers Market Pros Community and Intense, the Farmers Market Conference.
And I'm Justine Marzoni-Mead, Tent Talk producer, Marketing Director for Farmers Market Pros, and Logistics Coordinator for Intense, the Farmers Market Conference 2021, coming up in just 6 weeks, live online, March 15th through 18th.
Woohoo! So exciting! Well, welcome back to Tent Talk, everyone. Today we are chatting with Rawley of Rawley Creative and Strategy about helping farmers add to their product lines, decrease waste, and increase their farmers market sales. Ellen has worked on farms and at farmers markets, and one of her specialties is helping farmers access funds to expand through the value-added producer grant. That deadline is coming right up next month, so this is really great timing. Welcome, Ellen.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here. I've listened to your podcast for a while, so it's fun to be on.
Oh, good.
It's always like the craziest thing to hear that people actually listen to this.
It's always exciting.
Yeah.
It's not just going
Yay!
up. Yeah.
Long-time listener, first-time guest.
That's right.
Exactly.
Love it.
Yeah, we're always surprised, actually. We hear that from such an odd variety of people. We just had folks sign up for the conference that are from Norway. I'm guessing they speak English, but everything they send us always is in Norwegian. I don't speak that, so I'm always confused. But it's nice to know that bilingual. People are out there all over the world talking. We have a lot of friends in the UK that listen.
We love our listeners.
Yeah.
I love it. Awesome. All right. Well, welcome. We're just going to get started with a couple little background questions for you, just to kind of let people know who you are. So if you can just tell us like your professional background and how you ended up working in farming and farmers markets.
Yeah. So I first fell in love with farming actually in Thailand, in the rice fields of Thailand. I was studying abroad, and we had the opportunity when we learned about agriculture to go live and work alongside farmers there. And I just fell in love. It was basically the first moment where I felt like I was really made of flesh and bone, if that makes sense. I felt human in a different way because I had never experienced agriculture before, and just harvesting from sunrise to sunset. It was harvest time in the rice fields there. And one thing that I noticed as we learned from farmers through interviewing around the country was this huge disparity between farmers who were selling their finished rice straight to customers and those that were just selling a raw commodity to the export market. And that when I came back to the United States, farmers markets definitely were established, but not as popular as they are today. The fair trade market was just bubbling. And I got really interested in how do you create that more intimate connection between end users, consumers, users, like whatever we want to call ourselves when we're in the act of consumption, and producers, because it has I've just over and over in my own life and in other people's lives seen the transformative effect it has on the environment, on the land, on the resilience of our communities. And so with that question in mind, I've been funded to do research in Europe. I've worked on farms. I got involved in urban agriculture in San Francisco, worked at farmers markets, and then ended up landing at an olive oil farm here in Northern California, where I first launched my first value-added product was for them. And since then, I have to check if it's been 4 or 5 years, I started my own business and really work with farmers mainly on value-added production.
Which olive oil farm?
McAvoy Ranch.
Oh, great. Good.
Yeah, and Marin Roots was the first farm I worked for at the farmers market.
So what kind of services do you offer through your firm?
Yeah. So I do a lot of different things to help people both start a value added venture. And then I also do work with people who have one that's like not quite working yet. And so that includes compliance. I do both CGMP compliance and really California specific compliance around starting a food product. And then do product development and go to market strategy type things, which include actual formulation and positioning. And I kind of think of the process of value added, especially on a small scale, as being very holistic for it to be effective. So I end up with a lot of different touch points along the way. And then, of course, one of the things, we're going to talk about today is this value added producer grant that I do write for people.
And that deadline's coming right up. So I was a little bit unclear actually from the website, the federal government website, on whether it's due the 16th or the 22nd. They sort of bounce of March. They kind of bounce back and forth on that. It's like due earlier if you submit it digitally or something, or vice versa.
Which
It's very confusing.
Very odd to me as well. But yes, it's digitally due on the 16th. It's postmark due on the 22nd.
That is so
just in case you need to have a really long drive to the post office. I don't know.
Oh my goodness.
Anyway, coming up soon, so that's important.
Yeah. And Ellen, value added is really defined differently depending on where you are in your industry. Here in California, value added, there's a lot more restrictions on it. So could you just define this term, the way that you use it, and kind of flesh out before we dive into the value added grant and get the nitty gritty? Can you just kind of give us a working definition of value added?
Definitely. I love that question because it is very different in different places. So kind of the typical way people think about value added is what we call a change in state. And that's something like you're taking strawberries and turning it into jam. You're taking cattle and turning them into ground beef. Something that you start with one state, you end up with a different state that you're selling to people. There is a broader definition that I use for value added, and that once we get into the grant, they use as well, which is anything that's adding value to what you sell. So that doesn't have to be a change in state. An example of this would be if you sell your product as organic, it's going to fetch a higher price in the marketplace. So you're adding value to the raw commodity by growing it organically and selling it organically. Same thing with local. In a lot of locations, if you sell as and market yourself as local, you're now able to fetch a higher price in the marketplace. And then it can get even into more nuanced things like if you grow oats and you grow a field that's going to be able to be gluten-free because you don't interplant with wheat, or if you use, say, solar powered energy to, run some of your equipment. So then you can talk to the consumer about, you're a solar powered farm, anything that's really raising your ability to get a higher price in the marketplace for your raw produce or a final product is, in this general term, a value add.
That's fascinating because that I definitely thought of it more as processing it. So, doing the ground beef or the cuts of chicken versus the whole ones, or making the jam out of the berries. But what I'm hearing from you is that value added can be labeling, no change in the product
or
at all.
A branding technique.
Right, more of a branding thing.
Mm-hmm. It could be a branding technique or something related to the way that you actually grow the product. And then the fact that you tell people that. And it can also be looking at different ways you can use different parts of what you grow. For example, people who have animals and then end up creating a fertilizer from the excrement, or having mushrooms and then making a tea, or there's many ways that value added can look. Yeah,
we see a lot of that. We have a actually, we've got some mushroom farmers that sell mushroom seasonings and powdered mushrooms and that kind of thing. But we also have a good friend that's not in our markets, but she's up north that has llamas on her farm, and she sells llama poop as fertilizer.
Yeah.
And
I recently have come across llama poop like 5 times in the last 2 weeks. I don't know what
trending.
Instagram's like being like sending you ads on it.
We have a llama poop algorithm in place.
Well, that's so cool.
I should
And
try some.
I think that, I mean, one of our questions was, how do folks determine if value added is right for them? And I think that what you just told us, the answer is it could be right for everyone. I could see a lot of farmers being like, no, I don't want to make pies with my berries, or I don't want to, do this stuff. But it sounds like, your pitch would be, this could be a fit for anybody depending on,
just about
just
really
finding the right
definition.
thing for them.
Yeah, talking about the
Definitely.
value of your business and like the value of the work that you're doing is
Yeah.
value added. Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing I like, because people often come to me with this idea of, is this viable? Like there's a question of, is this XYZ going to be viable? And I always say, you can look on shelves, just going back to something that is a change of state, but like you can look at shelves and there are 50 tomato sauces, and those companies are all, say, on that shelf or in that farmer's market and can be doing well. Like the fact that there's 50 already doesn't mean that your tomato sauce is not going to be viable at the farmer's market. It's really how you go about executing it, making sure it's profitable for your farm, and also making sure you're communicating in a way that your customer understands the value and is excited to buy it. And if you produce something that's value added in a way that's going to work for the goals of your farm, to me, the question of, is it viable, kind of doesn't exist. Going back to like what you were saying about it really can be something that everybody benefits from.
Yeah, I think, and a lot of farmers look at it as too much trouble, or they do it and it's not real farming, doing that jam or drying those tomatoes, they think of that as a different
Does it
sort
have like
of
the
industry.
same street cred as
Yeah, exactly.
as farming?
So they'll develop value-added products sometimes, but kind of push them off to one corner of the table, where putting them center of the table and really pushing them, those are oftentimes their best margin items. But they're not, the farmers themselves haven't gotten it into their heads all the time, or their team at the market doesn't seem to always be aware of how much better a living they can make if they really kind of put those front and center.
Yeah, the margins for sure. I mean, it blows me away every time. This week, talking to people about this grant that's coming up, and they're making $8 a pound by creating a coleslaw mix instead of just selling cabbage, which they'd sell for, anywhere like around $1 a pound otherwise to wholesale, for example, or at the market for like 2 or 3, I think it was. It's really astonishing to me, that aspect. And then also the way that it helps cross promote. Like I love what you were saying about putting it front and center. If they then, put those dried tomatoes, I think was one you said, next to the kale, and kind of talked about like, we have these together today at the market because it makes a really good XYZ, then you're all of a sudden being able to cross sell other produce as well.
Yeah.
And I think it makes you just so much more competitive. So a lot of people, especially nowadays, not to look at anybody on our team in particular, but people who have not cooked as much, although I will say silver
called out.
Pre-2020.
But pre-2020, I will say silver lining, the COVID thing, somebody has really upped their game in the kitchen. But I know that a lot of people of certain generations, and that's my mom and my kids, actually have relied on food that's had more preparation to it when they buy it. So, you go to Trader Joe's or somewhere and you get cubed butternut squash. And that is so much more expensive than buying a butternut squash. But a lot of people, they are hard to cut. I know. And a lot of people just don't quite know how to approach that whole squash, but they know what to do with squash cubes. So in order to make farmers markets more competitive with grocery stores and attract that wider range of shoppers, I mean, something as easy as trimming and cutting your produce or shredding it into coleslaw as opposed to a whole head of cabbage would just seem to me to make the whole market more attractive to consumers. You'd attract more grocery shoppers.
Also a different demographic of shoppers.
Exactly.
I think that I have a family of 2, but even some stuff that I'm like, I'm not going to get through this much squash or this much cabbage in a week, or it's not always just a big family shopping. Sometimes it's an individual so even just cutting things in smaller pieces or kind of packaging things different way, I think could definitely expand your audience at the farmers market.
Yeah, I love the packaging things a different way too, because sometimes, as you were saying before, people are like, well, how am I gonna add in the process of like cutting it up or what have you? So the simplest, I was working one of these grants that I wrote, part of the project it funded, is just creating a kit. Like, just like they have the kits that, get sent to people's doors now. This is a farmer who sells mainly at the farmer's market, and they created a kit with one of their products that helps people. It's like all the things you need to make a salsa in a cool bag. And so that, in terms of what it takes them to do at the farm, is super minimal. Can even have farmers market staff doing the labeling while if there's downtime. And it's just a way to really highlight, here's everything together, and you just pick it up, which I think, especially now that with farmers, with the difficulties that farmers, or just the different way a farmer's market has to operate right now during COVID, having things that people can just like very clearly see, oh, I just get to pick this up and I have everything I need to make a salad or make a what have you, is really helpful for the customer and helps sales.
Definitely, because we're encouraging people to move through quickly. So a lot of us are having to maintain lowered capacity of people on a street at any one time.
Yeah.
So anything that we can do that makes it faster for them to shop is better.
Yeah.
And it just makes the farmer so much more money. And I feel like sometimes farmers even come across with, well, I feel guilty charging this much more for this just because it's in a package. But people's time is worth something, and and doing that labor for them before they get there, chopping up the vegetables or whatever, they find that valuable. They don't mind paying more for it.
Yeah, it's nice to have everything all packaged together too, because like as a new person who cooks, I'm always worried that I'm not gonna have all like the ingredients at home to make something. So if they put it all together for me, because I'm not really experienced enough to like be able to substitute things really easily, even if there would be something that I could substitute, I would feel nervous about that. So if a farmer is putting everything I need together to make a salsa, that's something I would definitely pick up. And just to be able to practice like making my own salsa, it's given me something to do because we're all bored at home. Like they could charge me, $10 to make a little thing of salsa.
It's entertainment.
It's entertainment. It's like I'm not going to the movies, so like something to do. And I just feel like that's such a big like step for farmers that are trying to look for creative ways to get their product out there. And then once I'm making that salsa, if they stop doing those boxes or they change to something else, I then feel confident enough to buy those individual ingredients in the future and make it. So thinking long term, it's just such a good step for them to take, I think. Yeah.
Logistically, I have a question about farmers interested in value added. What if they don't have a kitchen facility at their farm? I see that as like a big kind of like barrier of entry for value added if your farm is really small, or if you just don't have the facilities to like process things.
Yes, that is like ding, ding, ding. That's one of the biggest barriers to entry. There are regionally some co-packers that work specifically with farms and have low minimums. So we're really lucky up here in Northern California to have a co-packer called Preserve Farm Kitchens, whose mission is to basically, fill this gap in the food system that there used to be small processors in almost all agricultural areas, but a lot of them have closed or consolidated. So some local areas are fortunate enough to still have co-packers that will work in 30 cases, 50 cases, things like that. There's always the option of getting licensing and renting a kitchen yourself, but I do realize that is kind of starting another business for sure. And the third option to look at is other small makers where you live who oftentimes would like to they might not be a co-packer yet, but if you approach, a lot of times I've seen people approach, someone who just has like a small pickle company or just has a small jam company or just has a small whatever it is, and approach that person and say, hey, would you be interested? Because a lot of those companies, they're just starting out, and having the extra cash of you paying them to process for you would actually be very helpful for their bottom line too.
Yeah, I do feel like that's a thing that we get feedback from farmers who want to venture into the value added realm, is like, how am I going to make this, like someone who wants to do like sun-dried tomatoes or like make a salsa or a jam, where they really need like a kitchen. You can't just be making that at a table in your field, so it's coming up with like creative ideas to do that. I think partnering with somebody who's doing it already is a good way to look for when you're first starting out, especially just to get your kind of feet wet in that. And also like partner with another local business, and then you guys can kind of, refer business back and forth and things. So
yeah, and farmers market would be a great place to meet somebody.
Yeah,
Meet somebody that might want to do that.
Yeah.
Although there's also cottage food registrations that I think a lot of our farmers we see do.
Mm-hmm. And then, that might be a good segue into the grant too, because partially what this grant is really aimed at is helping pay some of those costs that are barriers to entries to farms to do these value-added ventures.
So as part of the funding there in the grant process is a legitimate use of funds to get a cottage food registration or rent a kitchen?
So you couldn't get a cottage food registration as part of it. You have to kind of show that you're able to carry out the project of the grant. But say there's a co-packer and you just can't afford the upfront fees, it could help pay for those co-packer fees. Say like there's a kitchen and you could rent it, but you don't have the funding to do that. It could pay for your rental fees and so we'll use the case of jam. So it could pay for the jars of the jam, the designer to design the labels, all the other ingredients that go into the product other than what you grow. And then the co-packer fees or the kitchen fees, all of that can get covered by this grant.
Yes. Oh, sorry.
Well, so I guess to take it back when you say all the things other than what you grow. So what are the so California has really different, extensive, proactive regulations about what farmers can sell in the certified markets. But our audience obviously is all over the country and far beyond. So from the grants tours, is this USDA that this is coming through?
Yes, USDA RD.
So from the USDA's point of view, what are the eligibility requirements for this in terms of how much you have to be producing yourself versus other ingredients? Things?
So I'll give a broad strokes of what the eligibility requirements are. So the eligibility requirements are, one, that it has to be value added, and they use that term the more broad way that we're talking about, and they break it down into like change in physical state, grown in a way that adds value, etc. You have to be a independent producer, or there's 3 other categories of a type of farm, all that basically boil down to that you're actually attached to being the grower, like you're a majority controlled corporation of growers, etc. So that's the second thing. And then 50% of the commodity that you're applying for, you have to grow yourself. So going back to the strawberries to jam, if you grow strawberries and you want to turn it into jam, at least 50% of the strawberries that you're going to use in that jam have to come from your farm, meaning you can purchase other strawberries. You could even purchase like mint from one farm. You could purchase, citrus. If you're doing a strawberry mint citrus jam, you could purchase other ingredients, but you would apply for strawberries and you have to be growing at least 50% of those strawberries. And you have to have shown that you have at least 1 year of harvest of that commodity. So you don't have to have made the product before and sold the product, but you do have to show that you have been growing this crop. And then your project, whatever project you decide to apply for, both has to grow your customer base and increase your revenue. So you just have to show through research and other ways that this project is going to actually increase the money that's coming back to you in the end. It's going to add value to the crop, and it's going to increase your audience of customers.
All right, so those are pretty basic requirements, nothing crazy there. Are there, this is maybe something that would come up down the line as you explain the whole grant process, but I'm just curious, are there points in the grant evaluation process for showing that you can reduce waste through creating value added? Because I think that's a big thing. One of our farmers recently, going back to the dried tomatoes, we talked to him for a couple of years about you should think about selling dried tomatoes because he was growing too many tomatoes. And so sometimes he'd sell out and sometimes he'd just have all these tomatoes. Obviously, they don't last very long. He was throwing a lot away and he was concerned about that, asking us about, should he be donating them, giving them to gleaning people, all good things, but really what we'd like to see him do is stay in business and be able to keep farming. So we were looking more for ways he could generate income from those. So he's gone into dried tomatoes and it's greatly cut down his waste. Do you see that happening with other value-added folks?
Definitely. A few of the grants that I've written for this grant have done exactly that. It's talking about overage. So farms because so many farms, tomatoes is a great example, but it's true for apples. It's true for so many crops. You always have overage because you're growing enough product. There's always going to be some of those tomatoes that have blossom end rot, that have spotting, that are not the right size, that the color looks bad. And doing value added with those tomatoes is a way, instead of just throwing them on the compost heap, all of a sudden you're not only able to profit off of them, but you're able to profit off of them outside of that crazy busy tomato season. So now you have a product that you can actually be selling outside of the tomato season as well, and going from $0 a pound to $3-5 a pound on those tomatoes.
Yeah,
so
we always talk about preserving too.
Yeah.
It's like no one, especially like in Southern California or like anywhere where there's year-round markets, we always see like there's not that many people preserving things or dehydrating things or things like that because we have a year-round growing season. But like tomatoes outside are not grown year-round. There are like breaks in our strawberry season, so it's nice when people can think ahead on that and do preserving and do canning and make other products with what they're growing seasonally.
And I think that's so smart too, because there are some times in the year where you go to a farm or you go to a stand at the farmer's market and that farmer has like kohlrabi or like they only have like certain things because that's all they're growing. But if they're like, oh hey, we actually also have this amazing tomato sauce left over that we made with tomatoes from the summer, all of a sudden like it's going to attract more customers because they're not just going to only be selling those root vegetables or whatever. They're going to have some preserved things from the summer, or it just kind of fleshes out their offerings in a way where
get us through the harsh winter of San Diego.
It is raining tonight.
Not so much in San Diego, but we are talking to people all over the country. And so I think this is important for farmers market managers to think about, as well as farmers, is that it's a tremendous advantage for your whole market to have a wider range of products. So managers out there that are listening, we want to be really proactive about talking to your farmers and pointing out to them that these grants are available and that they could see better margins on some products, or they can reduce waste by introducing these things. So as a really good market manager, just to keep your market thriving for as many months as possible, this is a wise thing to do. Help your farmers expand into this.
Yeah. And I know I keep using jam and tomatoes as examples because they're really easy to talk about. But I do recognize that those, especially sauce, has like extra hurdles in a lot of states to actually create. So this could even be dehydrating, which is usually allowed to be on farm. This could be like dehydrating and just packaging up dehydrated. This could be making salts. There's like easier ways
shredding
that
cabbage.
People could go after it than I just always like end up saying sauce and jam because
those sound like fun, but they are more difficult to
process. Way more difficult, way more hazardous to make. There's a lot more hurdles because you could make jam the wrong way. You could make tomato sauce
right.
the wrong
Yeah.
way. The acidity level in
Yeah,
those. It, like, makes it
botulism is
difficult.
not good for your farmer's market.
It's
No,
not
no,
a
no.
bad marketing ploy. Yeah, let's not.
Just make some kale chips
No
and call it a
COVID
day.
outbreaks,
Yeah,
no botulism.
yeah, with the
Yeah.
dehydrated and Roboku.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can go a long
Go
way.
buck
We have a
wild.
farmer that does apple chips, like little crispy apples. Amazing. And it's like
Yeah.
the perfect little snack food at
Yeah.
the market. He makes them year round, and it's such a smart thing, and I don't see anyone else doing it.
And he makes so much more money on those little bags of apple chips than he does on selling apples.
Because it's
Yeah,
like a
so
one
good.
apple's worth of chips in
Right.
there, but he can sell that bag for $5. So it's
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
yeah, it's great.
So, Ellen, with the deadline coming up, this is
Yeah.
a really good time to kind of narrow in on this. I know grant writing is really intimidating to a lot of people, probably with good reason, because you don't cross that T or dot that I, and you've got a perfectly good proposal, and you miss out on getting the grant. So, what would you say are the what's your top advice, like your top 3 tips for people that want to approach this, still have a little bit of time before these deadlines are coming up, and want to get this grant applied for?
Yeah. Number 1 is have a project worth funding. So before you're even thinking about how do I write this grant, just start with what is your project? What are your goals for your farm? And how do you create this project in a way that's going to meet those goals for your farm? Because if you have the biggest thing in how they score is they're really looking for a project that's going to have, like I said, that impact on your revenue and the impact on your customer base. So first start there is what I always tell people. Get a really solid project plan underneath you that's going to be strong. And then have like a workflow to go through the grants. So the USDA-RD is actually very helpful when it comes to this grant. They have a wonderful toolkit that I've written a few different grants, and I find this one the easiest to approach because they've created this toolkit that really leads you through the whole thing. And if you're fully answering their questions and showing them everything they're asking for, then you're going to score well. So the way that I lead people through writing this grant is first getting rid of doing all the really easy kind of niggly things, like getting that like one thing signed that you have to sign, and kind of getting out of the way all the smaller pieces, then really getting that project plan underneath you, so that you have a project worth funding. And then building out your budget and timeline realistically, thinking about when you're busiest in your season and what's the timeline that's going to work for you. And then at the very end, going over and writing your narrative. A lot of people, when they start a grant, they just want to start telling the story right away. They see the questions and they just want to start filling it out. But that's actually, in my experience, a huge waste of time, because once you really are getting down to the nitty gritty of the numbers and building that project plan, things are going to shift. And so if you've already written stuff, now you're going through and trying to find where you put like 50%, like that you're going to sell whatever 50% at farmers markets, and changing that to like 70%. And like, where did I put 50? And it just ends up being like maddening. So my biggest advice is to get that project really streamlined and defined, and then from there, write your narrative at the end.
And then you just get a little plug in here before we wrap up soon. You do provide help with grant writing, right? I know
Yes.
you've got a free webinar that we actually linked to in our last newsletter, if anybody was paying attention.
People do read
that kind of
those.
gives you an intro. But then you actually have services available, right, to mentor people through the whole grant writing process?
Yes. So I do one-on-one grant writing for this grant. This is like the grant that I really know a lot about, which is full for this year. But I do have a mentorship as well. And that's basically, I have this 4-phase process I've developed. So I've written this grant over the last 3 grant cycles. And so far I have 100% success rate. So since the beginning days, I have definitely created a way that I go about the grant writing process so that I can get it all done in time. There's always this short window that you have from when they announce it to when they're due. So I have this 4-phase process I go through as I attack this grant. And so with the mentorship, I lead you through that. And then I have developed over the years different templates and spreadsheets and things that help get all the other pieces in line for the application.
Oh, great. So that would be really helpful, I think, especially there's a lot of resources out there, but I think a lot of people are just intimidated by the whole process and never get into it. But it sounds like this would give them a great head start.
Yes.
And you're at ellenrawley.com?
Yes. And I would say, just as another piece of advice for this year. So like we said, March 16th, March 22nd are the due dates. I definitely, if you're interested in this grant, my biggest advice is to start now. This is the perfect amount of time to get it done. There's like 8 weeks left from February until this is now due. So I'm starting the mentorship on the 3rd of February. So, and if you're going to tackle this yourself, I'd say just like get to the website, start gathering your resources, and like focus on it now.
Yeah.
And get it done.
Yeah, really only like 6 weeks out, right? February 1st to March 16th?
Yeah.
I guess if you stretch it to the 22nd.
I always do the 22nd.
Oh, okay.
I do the
You
postmark
like the post
date.
office. Support the post office.
Support the post office and know that like all this stuff is there and there's not a problem with the server when you uploaded the thing.
True.
And
Right,
yeah,
true.
it's just simpler.
Yeah,
Old
good.
fashioned. It
Okay,
works.
so we'll plan on that.
Well,
This
on
has
that
been
note.
really helpful, and we're going to, as market managers, we're going to be out there scouting this
Yeah.
next week, looking at farmers and which people might be a good bet for this and pointing them in that direction.
Yeah.
I have so many people because I'm always constantly telling people to do it. So now
Yeah.
I can
Now we have a
give
place
them
to point them.
instead of just saying, "Hey, make that." Bye. I can say, "Oh, hey, I have a little thing
you
you
go.
can do to make that happen." Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks so much for speaking with us today, Ellen. It was so great, so helpful. I know a lot of farmers will find this really helpful, and people who don't even know where to start. This is such a great opportunity, and people who have maybe had this idea rolling around in their head for a long time. This is awesome to just have a way to start and get the grant. I mean, they don't have to have a grant to do it, but it's just such a nice way to kind of kick off a value-added product that they've been thinking about.
Certainly easier, and a good way for farmers market managers to do what we're all trying to do, which is get more people to the farmers markets. And the way to do that is to have more stuff.
For sure. Yeah. Help us do our job. Thank you. All right. Well, we will talk to you soon. Thanks so much.
Yes, it was wonderful to talk to you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Farmers markets are all about community, and all of us, operators, farmers, and vendors, keep learning. To learn what's happening from people just like you in various parts of the country, or share what's happening in your area, we have terrific conversations and people sharing resources over in our private Facebook group, the Farmers Market Pros Community. Please find us there, answer the 3 qualifying questions, and join the group. You can also message us on Instagram at Farmers Market Pros, or send us an email at connect@farmersmarketpros.com. If you're just getting started in farmers markets, check out our Vendor 101 online course. And to go deeper, register for our annual Intense the Farmers Market Conference, live online, March 15th through 18th, 2021. Learn more at farmersmarketpros.com. Thanks so much for listening to Tent Talk. Please leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you access your podcasts, and tell us and others how you're enjoying Tent Talk. If you're listening on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss our next episode. Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast, is proudly produced by Farmers Market Pros, where passion meets profit. Today's episode was recorded and edited by Justine Marzoni Mead. Original music by David Mead. Thank you so much for listening today, and we'll have another great episode next week. Tune in.